All right, so today we're going to be talking about Lesson 6-1. This is Chapter 6, Lesson 1. This is about equations and inequalities. We're going to be looking at solving one-step addition and subtraction equations. So the reason why we call them addition and subtraction equations is because when we look at these, we have a variable and something is being either added or subtracted. Now, depending on what we're doing here as far as adding and subtracting goes, that really is going to determine what we are going to be doing as far as the property goes. So the first property we're going to be looking at is called the subtraction property of equality, which means two sides of an equation remain the same if you subtract the same number from each side. So what we're going to focus in on, and this is kind of counterintuitive because the subtraction property of equality doesn't talk about if something is being subtracted from a variable, but it talks about what we do in order to solve. So for example, if we look at example 1 here, it says solve y plus 14 equals 20. We're going to be adding this 14 here, which means in order to get y all by itself, you have to undo that addition by doing subtraction. So if I go ahead and erase this now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 14 over here because this creates a zero pair. So I'm left with just y. Now, in order to stay balanced, this is where this word equality comes in. In order to stay balanced, I have to do this on both sides of the equal sign. So one really good strategy to help with that, if we make this, let's say, red. Draw a line right through the equal sign. So this tells me that whatever I do to the left side of this line, I also have to do to the right side. So I subtracted 14 on the left side, so I need to subtract 14 on the right side as well. And if I do that, 20 minus 14 is 6. If we look at example 2 here now, it says solve negative 12 equals 4 plus c. So again, I'm going to draw a line right down the middle. I want to get this c all by itself. I want to get this all by itself. So what I have to do is I have to get rid of the 4. Now here's where the tricky part comes in. This 4 is really being added. So in order to undo that, I have to subtract 4. And whatever shows up on one side has to go on the other side as well. So this creates a zero pair. I'm left with just c equals, I'm going to have negative 12 minus 4. This is where our integer rules come in. If I'm subtracting a number, I'm really adding its opposite. So negative 12 minus 4 is the same as negative 12 plus negative 4. Which would be negative 16. All right, let's look at our last example here. Example 3. It says a grapefruit weighs 11 ounces, which is 6 ounces more than an apple. So it says write and solve an equation to find the weight of an apple. So the first thing I have to do, I have to find a variable. The variable is going to be what we're looking for. So in this case, what I'm looking for is to find the weight of an apple. That's what I'm looking for. So I want my variable to reflect that. So I'm going to say A. And I'm going to say that this will represent the weight of an apple. Now, here's where the tricky part comes in because we really have to be looking at what is important in this question. So, first thing we have to do is a grapefruit weighs 11 ounces. That's really important. It's also important because it's 6 ounces more than an apple. So if I wanted to write an equation, what I would do is I would say the weight of the grapefruit is 6 ounces more than an apple. I know the weight of the grapefruit. That's 11. It's 6 ounces more than an apple, so I'm going to take the weight of the apple and add 6 to that. Now I have a problem where I have a variable and I'm adding something to it. So that's going to be looking just like these two examples here, 1 and 2. So I'm going to use the subtraction property of equality. So when I go ahead and do this then, remember I want to draw a line through the equal sign. It's going to be very helpful to keep things balanced. But I want to get a out by itself, so I'm adding 6. So in order to undo that, I want to subtract 6 to create a 0 pair. And whatever shows up on one side has to show up on the other. So a is all that remains, and 11 minus 6 is 5. Now, with any word problem, each number represents something. So I know that a is 5, but I know that a is also the weight of the apple. That's what we came up with here. So I would say an apple weighs 5, because that's what we came up with here. And the units in this problem are going to be ounces. All right, now we're going to be looking at the next page here. And now we're going to be looking at something called the addition property of equality. So just like when we were subtracting here, the problem looked like it was an addition problem, so in order to solve it, I had to subtract. Now I'm going to have a subtraction problem, and in order to solve, I need to add the same number to both sides. So I'm going to go through the exact same process. I'm going to draw a line through the equal sign so that I know if something happens on one side, it also has to show up on the other. Now, I'm going to be adding 8 to both sides because I have a z minus 8. So in order to get rid of this 8, I have to add it. And remember, what happens on one side has to show up on the other. Create a 0 pair. I'm left with z equals 12 plus 8 is 20. Last example, example 5. It says Vivian practiced the piano for 32 minutes. She practiced 11 minutes less than her brother did. Write and solve an equation to find out how long her brother practiced for. So we're going to be looking for important information. First thing is we want to find out how long her brother practiced for. Other pieces of information. We know that Vivian practiced for 32 minutes, and that was 11 minutes less than her brother. So if I go ahead and start solving this, I first need to come up with a variable. So I'm going to say b. And that's going to be how much time the brother practiced. So I know now that as I go through and start solving or writing this equation, I know that Vivian practiced for 32 minutes, and that's 11 minutes less than her brother did. Which means 32 is 11 less than the brother's time. Now here we go again. We have a subtraction problem, and in order to solve that subtraction problem, I'm going to add to both sides. So that's why this is called the addition property. So going ahead and taking care of this now, in order to get rid of this minus 11, I need to add 11 to create a 0 pair. And whatever shows up on one side of this line here has to show up on the other. So I'm left with b equals 32 plus 11 would be 43. So that's an important number because it tells us how much time the brother practiced for. So we would say that Vivian's brother practiced for 43, and the units in this are going to be minutes.